Welcome back, everybody. My name is Tucker, and in this video, we're going to be looking back at some NBA trades that didn't make sense at the time and still don't make sense here now in 2020. These are some of the worst trades in NBA history, not necessarily because of how poorly they worked out, but just the fact that there was no logic to them at the time at all. But really quickly before we get started, if you enjoy the NBA, then consider subscribing. I upload every single day, basically. Okay, really quickly, before we actually get the list going, there's an honorable mention that needs to be made here, and it's both of the Nets trades, the Kevin Garnett, Paul Pierce, Jason Terry trade, and the Damian Lillard for Gerald Wallace trade. I've talked about those so many times that I didn't include them in this video. There's like 4 different videos on my channel that you can go and look at if you would like to learn more about those trades specifically, but I did feel the need to mention them before moving on to number 1. And number 1 is a relatively common one that gets brought up as one of the worst trades in NBA history, but it isn't often looked back upon, and it's essentially Kyrie Irving for Baron Davis. So back on February 24th, 2011, Kyrie Irving was traded as a future 2011 first-round draft pick with Baron Davis to the Cleveland Cavaliers in exchange for Jamario Moon and Mo Williams. And the reasoning behind this trade was essentially the Clippers wanted to get out from under Baron Davis's contract. He was a very expensive player, but not a very productive one at that point in his career. They had other guys that they wanted to re-sign, like DeAndre Jordan, and they felt like they should trade away their first-round pick unprotected in order to get off of his salary and get Mo Williams back in return. The problem with this was the team wasn't very good at the time. The Clippers weren't very good. And so this pick was probably going to be top 10, definitely going to be in the lottery. And the reasoning just didn't make any sense and ended up becoming, like I said, one of the worst trades in NBA history. So I found a quote from the Clippers general manager at the time about this trade. He said, "The drill is, as always, is the player you're getting back more valuable than the potential you could get in the draft? Our analysis at this point in February is that it was more valuable to get a 28-year-old all-star point guard that we have for the next few years, cap flexibility to make sure we take care of business of our own players, as opposed to speculating on another kid that's 19 years old with 1 year of college experience, and I'm not that high on the draft to begin with this year." Now, the issue was the Clippers weren't very good. They ended the season 32-50, and the lottery odds just went kind of crazy, and they ended up with the number 1 overall pick, but of course they owed that selection to the Cleveland Cavaliers, who went on to select Kyrie Irving. Now, the problem here is a couple of things. One, the general manager didn't really like the draft at the time, and this is a draft that included Kyrie, Kemba Walker, Klay Thompson, Kawhi Leonard, Jimmy Butler, Nikola Vucevic, guys like that. But also, everybody knew that Mo Williams wasn't an actual all-star point guard anymore. He mentions, we want this 28-year-old all-star point guard. Mo Williams was averaging 13 points per game at the time of this deal midway through the 2011 season. LeBron was no longer there, and everybody knew that without LeBron there, Mo Williams was not an all-star player. So this deal didn't make any sense at the time. It still doesn't make any sense now when you look back on it, to have all these different point guards involved in the deal, from Baron Davis to Mo Williams to Kyrie Irving, and for the Cavaliers to get Kyrie Irving just for taking on Baron Davis's contract is one of the best trades that they've ever made and one of the worst that the Clippers have ever made. Obviously, the lottery odds, going the way that they did made this look a lot worse than it would have in hindsight, but still not a great trade at all. Okay, number 2 now is a trade that didn't make any sense at the time, but not because of some crazy difference in value between 2 different teams, like the first one with Kyrie going to Cleveland. But it just doesn't make any sense. Let me explain. So Brandon Roy, June 28th, 2006, is traded by the Timberwolves to the Portland Trail Blazers for Randy Foye. Doesn't seem like that big of a deal, right? Well, this is in the 2006 NBA draft, and Brandon Roy was the 6th pick, and Randy Foye was the 7th pick. And there were no other pieces involved in the deal. They just swapped the 6th and the 7th pick. And there were some other deals involved prior to that allowed the Blazers to get the 7th pick and then move up to the 6th to get Brandon Roy. But this is some stuff that happens in like 2K, where you select a player 5th overall and then 10th overall is offered to you in exchange just for that player. It doesn't make any sense how you can move up in draft positioning and move up in value via, 1 extra slot in the draft without actually trading anything else. This doesn't make any sense whatsoever to just straight up swap 2 players in the same draft with no other pieces involved. It's again, this is just something that happens in 2K, and Roy ended up becoming a really good player but didn't have the longevity, and Foye had a longer career but never reached nearly the same peak that Brandon Roy did. So in terms of value for the 2 teams, it's kind of up and down, but in terms of how much sense it made at the time, it's kind of ridiculous. Moving on now to the furthest back trade that I have in this video, and it's Joe Johnson being traded to the Phoenix Suns. February 20th, 2002, the Boston Celtics, along with Randy Brown and whoever that guy's name is, traded Joe Johnson and a 2002 first-round pick to the Phoenix Suns in exchange for Tony Delk and Rodney Rogers. And essentially what this ends up becoming is that first-round pick and Joe Johnson, who's a rookie at the time, ends up becoming a really good player for Phoenix and then moves on to Atlanta, multiple-time All-Star. A rookie Joe Johnson in exchange for 3 seasons of role players. Tony Delk and Rodney Rogers played a combined 3 seasons in Boston, and they weren't highly productive. They were just veteran guys that, were nice little role players to put around the stars of Paul Pierce and Antoine Walker that they had at the time. And essentially the logic behind this deal was Boston had some early season success for the first time in a long time, and they wanted to make sure they were going to make the postseason, and they felt like it was okay for them to sacrifice not only Johnson, but a first-round pick to bring in veterans and role players that were going to help them push for the postseason. Now, in 2020, that never flies. There's no way that this deal happens. Players never get traded as rookies in the middle of the season now anyway, much less a player that did show promise like Johnson did at just 20 years old. And a year and a half later, after this deal, Joe Johnson was playing 40 minutes a game for the Suns and then ended up being moved to Atlanta because the Suns didn't want to pay him. But this is a guy that ended up being an extremely talented player, and the Celtics just gave up on him as a part of what could have been a really interesting core with Pierce and Walker, just because they started to have a little bit of success and they wanted to cash in on their future to like I said, have 3 seasons of role players combined but between 2 players. This made absolutely 0 sense now. It made 0 sense at the time, but the mindset was just different back then when it came to trades, and they were willing to mortgage their future to have a little bit of postseason success, but just not a deal that would fly ever in 2020. All right, second to last now is a similar one to the Brandon Roy thing, and it's LaMarcus Aldridge being traded for Tyrus Thomas. June 28, 2006, Aldridge was traded by the Chicago Bulls with a 2007 second-round pick to the Trailblazers in exchange for that guy and Tyrus Thomas. And it's the same thing. Aldridge is the second pick. Tyrus Thomas is the 4th pick. They swapped picks without really anything else being involved. There was a second-round pick involved, and then there was this other player involved, but it was on both sides, so there was essentially even out, and you're swapping the second pick for the 4th pick. It doesn't make any sense. It also doesn't make any sense how Portland barely gave up any assets outside of their own picks in this 2006 draft and ended up with Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge. And Tyrus Thomas was, seen as this high upside player that could be something really, really good down the road. LaMarcus Aldridge was seen as a guy that was a little bit more of a sure thing, but maybe his ceiling was lower. And obviously Aldridge has had a much better career than Tyrus Thomas. But it's not so much about the value. It's just about, I don't understand how these teams are trading picks within the same draft without any value outside of it and just swapping 2 for 4. It doesn't make any sense to me whatsoever looking back on it. Now, I highly doubt it made any sense at the time, and there's just the way that things were done back in the day, and they just swapped picks. I don't know. But that 2006 class, the more I look back at it, the more I want to make a full in-depth video about it, because it makes quite literally no sense at a couple of different points. But props to the Blazers for getting Brandon Roy and LaMarcus Aldridge out of that class. And last up now is Vince Carter being traded to the, at the time, New Jersey Nets back in December of 2004. Now, Vince Carter did not want to be a Toronto Raptor anymore at this point. There were some issues there in Toronto, and it was not a good situation for anybody, right? So the Raptors didn't have a ton of leverage. They knew that they weren't going to get great value out of Vince, and I understand all those things, right? But let's just look at what they got for a guy that was considered one of the better young players in the league at the time, and certainly a few years prior to this actual trade going down. December 17, 2004, Carter was traded by the Raptors to the New Jersey Nets for Alonzo Mourning, never played with the Raptors, Eric Williams, a 2005 first-round pick, which ended up becoming Joey Graham, and a 2006 first-round pick, which ended up becoming Ronaldo Balkman. Literally none of these guys did anything significant for Toronto at any point in their career. Some of them played a little bit for them, and some of them, moved on to different teams pretty quickly, but none of them made any kind of real impact on the Raptors. Meanwhile, Vince Carter, it's not like he ever won a championship with New Jersey or anything, but he was a really good player, and he moved on to different places and ended up having a nice career. And I understand that there was a lack of leverage and the situation wasn't great in Toronto. He didn't want to be there anymore, but you've got to get more than this out of someone like Vince Carter, or you've got to make the move earlier when you can actually get value out of him. Because like I said, none of these guys did anything for them. They got basically nothing in exchange for Vince Carter, and you can say what you want about the situation, but there's just no way that should happen at the time or even now. So this one is another one that just doesn't really make a lot of sense now looking back on it here in 2020. But that is going to be the end of today's list, and I thank you all very much for watching. Let me know down in the comment section below if there are any trades that you felt like I missed that should have been mentioned in this video, and I will absolutely take a look. But yeah, like I said in the beginning, my name is Tucker. I hope you guys enjoyed today's video. If you missed any of my previous videos, then be sure to check out the boxes on screen. Thanks again, and I'll see you all next time.